Today I am going to go through a traditional red velvet cake recipe, and I am not going to do my normal introduction because I have been sick and I look pretty rough. So we're just going to do an entire voiceover since I got sick a day or so after making this cake for my son's birthday. I'm going to start with getting the pans ready. The recipe calls for 3 9-inch cake pans, but I only have 2 cake pans of the same size, so I ended up with extra batter, but that's okay. So what I'm doing is I'm just tracing out the cake pans onto parchment paper because you want to put parchment paper in the bottom. And I go ahead and spray the bottom a little bit when I'm spraying the sides, just so that the parchment paper sticks better. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to give you a quick history about this cake. Years ago, my son wanted a volcano cake he was really into dinosaurs, and so I made a red velvet cake so that the inside would be lava-like, and he fell in love with red velvet cake. But now that we're older and I wanted to give him something from scratch, I didn't want to use a boxed cake mix or add the just massive amounts of dye that it takes to get that red coloring, because I've done both. So what I decided to do was just a traditional red velvet cake recipe without the food dye. A little history of the cake itself is during Victorian era, cocoa was added to give a velvety texture. Due to the acidic properties in the cocoa, they helped to break down the coarse flours, because traditionally cakes were more of a bread with fruits and things added to it. But when adding cocoa, they found that the properties of cocoa helped break down the coarseness of the flour, and it was a softer cake and it became more of a luxury item. Something with that chemical reaction of the natural cocoa also gave a red coloring to the cake. The first printed recipe in the U.S. was in the now famous Joy of Cooking book by Irma S. Rombauer. And during World War II, the rationing of butter and sugar, a lot of bakers started using beet powder or beet juice, giving the cakes a more red coloring. But what that allowed was the cakes to hold moisture. Now, some historians credit African Americans for bringing over the red velvet cake, specifically Michael, I think his name's Twitty. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name. He is into Afro-culinary histories and said that eating red foods was brought to Texas in the 19th century from enslaved Yoruba and Congo tribesmen. But the cake has become very popular for Juneteenth celebrations, symbolizing the bloodshed during the slavery era of the U.S. A lot of people credit the Adams Company, which is an extract company, for bringing the cake, the red velvet cake, into existence, saying something about a housewife was bored with her cake colors and added the red food coloring. The Waldorf Astoria Hotel also takes credit for inventing the red velvet food cake or bringing it to America. There's a lot of history with that cake particularly, but in our house, it simply evolved from looking for lava for a dinosaur cake when my son was having a dinosaur-themed birthday party. So there's a bit of a background on that. So what I am using here is a traditional recipe that just uses a lot of raw flour, butter, sugar. And the one thing I am doing different is instead of using regular buttermilk, I'm using powdered buttermilk that I bought from Azure Standard. This buttermilk does not taste like regular buttermilk to me, or it doesn't have that really thick consistency that I'm used to in cultured buttermilk from the store. However, I am loving having the powdered buttermilk around so that I can just make some and not have to think about it when I need it. The one thing that is important with red velvet cakes is you need to sift your flours. So, especially when using cake flour or cocoa powder, it gets the little balls of flours in there. And so if you don't sift that through to get a fine powdery texture, you're not going to have as consistent of a cake batter. So make sure you sift those. And make sure your butter and your cream cheese and eggs are at room temperature before you start as well. I microwaved the buttermilk until it was warm and added a little vanilla. Beat the brown sugar and butter together about 5 minutes until fluffy, and then of course you add the eggs one at a time, and then slowly blend in the flour mix and buttermilk, alternating each one in about 3 different sections, and then mixed for another 5 minutes after it was together, and then distribute into the pans. And like I said, I had some left over. Now, typically it says bake 30 to 35 minutes. I think I got my pans a little bit too full, so it took over an hour, and so my edging got kind of a thick crust on it, and honestly it looked more like a brownie to me, and the texture was much more brownie-like. It was very dense. But then after we cooled them and got them out of the pans, I put them back in the pans and chilled them in the refrigerator for an hour and started making the frosting. And the frosting was very simple. It's just the unsalted butter, cream cheese, vanilla, and powdered sugar, and of course some more cocoa powder, because my son decided he wanted chocolate frosting. But I went ahead and did a chocolate cream cheese frosting so that it would cut some of that chocolate with that tart cream taste, or cream cheese taste. So once I got that done and the cakes were properly chilled, I just did a quick old-fashioned frosting on them. And then you will see I had to repair a candle because I broke it getting it out of the package. And we had a lovely little birthday surprise here. It was very late when I was getting this together. I had so much going on during the day that I had to kind of do this over the entire day. And so I kind of finished frosting it just in time as they were eating pizza for dinner. And we got to sing happy birthday and open gifts. So it was a school night. But anyway, this particular recipe, and I'm going to put it down here, as well as the cream cheese frosting, which was a very good recipe. It came out very brownie-like. So this was almost like eating a brownie cake versus that soft, fluffy red velvet texture that you get from like the box cake mix or a traditional red velvet cake. So this, I don't know if this was something I did, if this was using the powdered buttermilk. I'm not actually quite sure. However, this was a really good cake. The kids loved it. Matt said it was the best one he'd ever eaten. It just was not fluffy like I am used to with the red velvet cakes with some of the other recipes I've made. So if you make this, tell me what you think. And I will be back again with some gardening content soon. Hopefully my lungs will be back up to getting out in the garden and getting some things done. But I have been going out to the greenhouse and getting some seeds in. So happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Matthew. Happy birthday to you. Yay!
You're officially 1-1.
We will see you soon. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.